Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today what we're going to discuss are 3 things that you need in order to be successful in real estate in 2023 and beyond. Now, these 3 things that if you have them, you will produce at a high level. And if you don't have them, if you work towards them, your production will increase. It's really that simple. And the thing about these 3 concepts is by being good in these 3 areas doesn't mean that you're the best in each one of these areas. So all we're aiming to be is in the top 25% for each one of these areas. And if we can, in fact, do that, we're going to see our production skyrocket. And this will make sense as we start to work through these 3 items, because we're also going to explain to you how you can improve in each one of these domains. So again, we are aiming to be in the top 25% with each one of these 3 things. We're not aiming to be the best. If we're the best, great. But that being said, that shouldn't be our target because actually becoming the best in each one of these things is highly unlikely. And even if it was doable, which theoretically it is, it would just come at the expense of our ability to improve in the other domains. So let's jump in. And keeping in mind that in real estate, we have to wear a lot of different hats. But these 3 things will truly make you a ton of money in real estate. The first one is probably the most important, and it is communication. And we've probably heard this so many times that we have to be good communicators in real estate. And sometimes, here's the thing, is we think we're good communicators, and in fact, we're not. So we truly need to always be trying to improve our level of communication. Now, how do we actually do this? We're going to look at a few different strategies, but generally, if we want to improve at anything in life, if I want to become a better woodworker, a better tennis player, a better cook, I have to be doing those things. So reading our way into becoming a better communicator, it will help, but not nearly as much as actually communicating. So we have to get in the habit of communicating. Now, a lot of times in team environments, this is already created for us. We're working on objections and role play, and we're working through different scenarios. So we're already putting ourselves in these positions. But if we're not doing that on a regular basis, find a mirror and start talking to yourself. I have done this for years. I've used to walk around my house and I would simply say objections to myself, and then I would mutter under my breath my actual response, and then I would pretend I was the client responding. I looked like a total crazy person, but I would just wander around my house talking to myself, and I would throw the hardest objection I could at myself, and then I would walk around and try and actually answer it. And so we don't have to think that we need a conversational partner in order to improve our communication. Always just need to be working to improve this. Now, how can we do it? First off, in order to improve our communication, we have to be selecting the right words. So what does this mean? We need to be focusing on improving our vocabulary. We have to be able to describe things well. Now, this doesn't mean using words inappropriately just for the sake of using a big word. Instead, it's using the word to add more color into what it is that we are trying to convey. So with that being said, building our vocabulary, how do we go about doing it? Most of the time, this is going to come down to reading and writing. So the more that we read and the more that we write, the more our vocabulary will improve and the more broad our vocabulary will become. So that's part of communication, is having the right words. And the second part is how we're delivering them. And so we've probably heard these things before, but Toastmasters and improv classes are fantastic. Now, especially if you're thinking, okay, I've heard improv class before, but there's no chance you'll ever see me at an improv class because that seems horrible. That means you should do it even more. Because yes, it's uncomfortable, but everybody there is uncomfortable. Nobody there is an improv star. And what this causes us to do is off the start, we're going to be very tight. We're going to be kind of restricted in how we're communicating and how we're actually going about doing these improv exercises. But then towards the end of the class, we're going to become more comfortable. We're going to see our guard let down slightly. We're going to be okay with not necessarily being perfect when it comes to our improv. And that will then improve our ability to communicate. So Toastmasters and improv are great because they're a forcing function for us to go out there and actually improve our communication. Now, the next thing that we can and should be doing is recording videos. And so even if we're doing a monthly video for our email newsletter, if we're not doing at least that, we should be doing more than that. But if we're doing at least that, we're going to become better communicators. Now, as we're speaking to a camera, it's forcing us to actually collect our thoughts. It's forcing us to actually watch ourselves at times, which can be, I know, excruciatingly painful. But that being said, it's extremely beneficial to go back and watch ourselves. I just can't stand watching myself. But when I actually do go back and watch myself, I find ways that I can improve. And so by doing this, by just speaking to a camera, It's equally as valuable speaking to a camera as it is potentially speaking to a client. Now, the only thing is the camera can't talk back to us, which in a sense is actually kind of a good thing, but it does force us to actually put together our thoughts. And that's why even monthly, as an email newsletter, sending this out to our clients, we have to collect our thoughts on what's happening in the market. And then it also forces us to actually communicate this. So if you want to be good in real estate and you want to improve, work on your communication. Even if you think you are the best communicator, work on it. Because if you think you're the best communicator, there's actually a pretty good chance you're not. You might be kind of over assessing your talents in that regard. And so even the fact that you think you might be really good at it, or on the other side, maybe you think you're extremely poor at it, so you don't even want to start in these environments like improv and Toastmasters that are extremely welcoming, and do the crazy thing that I do, which is walk around the house muttering objections to yourself and trying to respond to them. You will get a few looks at those that are in your house, but it's all for the purpose of improving at real estate. Let's move on to number 2. So the second thing that we should be in the top 25% at is market conditions. Market conditions. Now, this also kind of bleeds back over to communication. And that's because when we're out and we're talking to people and we're in the grocery store line, or we're out at the gym, or we're doing something where there's people around us, or we're at an event, or we're at a birthday party, people are going to ask us that question that we're all prepared for, which is what's happening in the market? How's the market? What am I hearing in the news? Are prices dropping? Are prices going up? What's happening with inventory levels? So we have to be prepared to respond to this. Now, oftentimes we think, oh, okay, well, when that moment actually comes up, I will be good to go and I will respond to it. But in fact, if you've ever kind of been caught on your heels, this actually happened to me a lot when I was early on in my career. I thought, oh yeah, I kind of know what's going on in the market. And then somebody would ask me that question and I would respond to them. And then they would have like some sort of insightful comment back to me. And I'm like, I've never really thought of it that way. And that forced me to think, okay, I think I have a good handle on the market, but here I am talking to somebody who's not in real estate and has these really insightful comments. And that was actually quite humbling, because then I had to look back and said, okay, well, maybe I don't know it that well, or even if I do know it, I haven't actually collected my thoughts and how I'm going to communicate this. So how do we go about improving our understanding of the market? Well, we have to actually become quite obsessed with our real estate market. We have to become very obsessed with what's happening in our market, the direction of the market, and with the data behind the market. We have to become borderline obsessive. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going absolutely crazy when it comes to market conditions and trying to look up everything and read every news article, but it's pretty close, especially if we feel like we don't have a good handle on our market. We should definitely be reading everything that we can get our hands on. We also need to be walking through homes. So if you're relatively new, you have to be doing previews. You have to be going and visiting open houses, or actually hosting open houses. You have to be tracking a new listing that comes up down the street from you. You should be doing a CMA on that, and then you should be determining what it actually sells for and seeing how accurate your CMA truly was. So what this really is showing us is we need to be very obsessive about what's happening in our market. We need to have a point of view on what is happening in our market, and not only currently, but we need to have a point of view on what the future holds. Now, of course, we cannot guarantee what the future holds, but we have to think about what it is that we know and what sort of data we have in the back of our mind, and then we have to put this together. So for example, in my market right now, we're dealing with very low inventory levels. Now, we're also dealing with rising interest rates, but we're dealing with these tight inventory levels. So what do the next 3 months hold? Well, the next 3 months could be very interesting for us, because as we move into spring market, in my market in particular, we'll tend to see a surplus of listings come on. Now, we've seen buyer demand decrease. Now, if we do end up seeing a surplus of listings and buyer demand doesn't increase with that rising number of listings that we typically see in the spring market, then we could see downward pressure on prices. Now, that statement is a lot more compelling to somebody than me saying, oh yeah, inventory levels are really low, and just leaving it at that. So inventory levels are really low, but as we're moving towards spring, if we do see the normal rise in sellers, but we don't see the equivalent rise in buyers, then we could be in a position where we see downward pressure on prices. However, if buyers rise with the increase in listings that we typically see, or if the increase in listings doesn't happen this spring, we're going to continue to see upward pressure on prices within certain market segments. So now whoever is having a conversation with you, that's just one example, but if someone's having a conversation with you, they're probably walking away with that conversation being like, that person actually has some pretty important things to say and has some pretty insightful comments. And so that's really what we want to get to with market conditions. And of course this touches very, very closely to communication, because just knowing what's going on in the market and being able to communicate it, those are two things that are kind of like a Venn diagram. They overlap in a sense, right? We need to be able to know what's happening, but we also need to be able to communicate communicate it well and effectively. This moves on to number 3. And number 3 is actually a really beautiful one. And the reason I say that is because it doesn't actually require any additional magical skill set. And not that the first two do. In fact, communication, if you feel like you need to improve in communication, giving yourself a solid 6 months to learn how to communicate at a high level, ensuring that you're going to Toastmasters, you're going to improv classes, you are communicating with people on a daily basis, you will see that improve. Same thing with market conditions. But the third one actually doesn't require much skill at all, and it's follow-up. If we become good at follow-up, then we will sell more real estate. Now, what do I mean here when I say good at follow-up? That's probably not even the best word. Here I am talking about vocabulary early on. I'm using that word. But what I mean when I'm talking about follow-up is truly the consistency and the friendly persistence that we need to have when it comes to real estate. Those of us who follow up on a regular basis are going to sell more real estate. There are some really interesting studies done, actually. And in fact, in most markets, about 10% of real estate agents are going to do about 90% of the transactions. Generally speaking, that is truly how it breaks down. Now, what's different about these 10%? Is it that they've been in the real estate industry for longer than the remainder? Well, no, not always. What it comes down to is these 10 tend to prospect and follow up on a regular basis. Now, how do I know this? Well, that's because if you survey agents, about 10% of agents follow up and prospect on a regular basis. 10%, 90% don't. And then the really interesting concept here is about 10% of agents are going to do about 90% of the business. So do we think that that's just a coincidence, or do we think that there's actually some overlap here between those that prospect and those that do the majority of the business? Well, I would definitely say it's the latter. There's definitely a correlation between those people who are prospecting and following up on a regular basis with those people that are producing at a high level. Now, what's stopping us? What's stopping us is truly our own resistance that we don't want to be pushy, we don't want to be salesy, and we don't want to get rejected. That's truly why we don't follow up. It's not that we don't want the business. Of course we want the business. We don't want to come across as salesy, pushy, needy. We also don't want to be rejected. We don't want that person to tell us to beat it, so we don't want to make that phone call. So here is the true trick when it comes to following up. When it comes to following up, it's not about the outcome. It's not about the outcome. You need to reward the activity of following up. You need to reward yourself for doing the task of following up, and that unto itself deserves a reward. The outcome of what happens from the follow-up, whether that is a successful potentially listing or a new buyer, or whether that's an F off, that doesn't matter. That's the outcome from the follow-up. You are only rewarding yourself for the activity. So you're rewarding yourself for the action of following up. And if you do that, then you've been successful for the day. It doesn't matter what the actual outcome is from the follow-up. And so this is why this one is so great, is because we don't need any specific skills or tricks or techniques. We just need to actually follow up. We just need to follow up with people. Now, with that being said, yes, there's certain ways that we can do that, but generally, it's not that we don't have enough ways to follow up. Like truly, if we're sending listings to people, that's following up. If we're asking them questions, that's following up. If we're asking them about their interests, that's following up. So it's not like we really need a ton more information in order to follow up, or more strategies to follow up, or we need some really particular, well-crafted email. None of that stuff is really what matters. What matters is the activity. And so reward yourself for the activity of following up. Do not worry at all about the outcome. So if you have those three components, those three ingredients, you are going to produce at a very high level. At a very high level. And so this is communication and always looking to improve it, even if you think you're great at it. Next is market conditions. Again, even if you think you understand your market really, really well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be reading the news articles, and you should be watching what's going on within your market segment. And I know I'm saying reading the news, although sometimes some of the news that we read is not accurate, but that's another reason why we need to read it, because we need to know what our clients and customers are actually reading. And then third and finally, follow up. But again, not worrying about the outcome. The outcome doesn't matter. All we need to focus on is the action of following up. Do those three things and your production will skyrocket. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode. Remember, you can reach out anytime at revrealestateschool.com, or I'm on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.